Hello everyone. In this video we are going to look at transitions. Transitions define the behavior of your UI element based on player interaction. So for example, if your player is going to click on your button or if he moves your mouse over a button, so that event can trigger a visual change in your buttons, and those changes based on player interaction event is governed by transitions. So in this scene, I have just added a normal button with default transition state. I will just change the default colors a little bit so the transition is more apparent. Now, when I play the game, the most basic interaction that he can do is move his mouse on the button. And in this case, the color changes to the highlighted color, which I have set in the transition. And when I press the button, the color changes to pressed color. So this is an example of how transition makes your UI more interactable, more user friendly, and it is also easy to use, and the changes and the interaction is directly visible to the player, so a nice feedback loop is generated in your game. There are four transition methods or modes that you can apply to your UI elements. The first one is none, which will simply do nothing on player interaction. The second and the default one is color tint. In this case, you can change the tint of your UI element, which in the case of button, it will change this image component and the color of the sprite, which is the background sprite for this button, and you can add a tint to that image based on the different button states or UI state. So here we have option of assigning four colors to four UI states. I will explain all of them one by one. So the normal color is your normal button state. That is, if the button is not highlighted, if the button is not pressed, so it will be your default button state. Then we come to the highlighted state and we assign a highlighted color. The highlighted state means it has two applications. So if it is a PC game, so in those cases, if you move your mouse over your button, then that button will get highlighted. So in this case, when I move my mouse over the button, the color changes to the highlighted color. And in some of the games, you may see that if you have a bunch of buttons in a vertical row, and you can for example, in mainly in console games where you don't have a mouse pointer in the UI, so if you want a UI scheme in which your buttons are assigned in a vertical column like this, and you are using your arrow keys or your joystick to move your selection and then press any button as click, so you can do that by I have simply duplicated these buttons and assign a button as the first selected, so at least one button is selected at the start of the game. Now if I play the game, you can see that the first button is highlighted, and in this case, if I press the enter, which is equivalent to your mouse click, then that button will be clicked, and I can move my selection using my arrow keys. So I'm pressing my arrow keys or WS on my keyboard, and the currently selected button, when we are using this type of UI scheme, is shown using the highlighted color. The third state for a button is the press state, which in the case of using a mouse, while you have kept your left mouse button pressed, it will show you the pressed color. So if I keep my left mouse button pressed, it will show me the red color, and if I leave my mouse, it will go back to the highlighted color. And if you are using keyboard as a click, then it will show you the pressed color just for a short amount of time. And the disabled color is shown when your button is disabled, which is a state in which your button is not interactive. You can't click on that button. It is useful in cases, For example, if you have 20 levels in your game and some levels are locked, so you don't want the player to click on those levels. On In those cases, you can disable certain buttons, which you can do here by clicking on uh, interactable. And this means that this button can't be clicked by the player and the color will change to the disabled color. Color multiplier is simply a multiplication factor by which your given color of various states, like highlighted color, is multiplied with the color of your UI sprite, which in this case is the background image of this button. And the fade duration is the time of transition between a single state to the next state. So, for example, if I go from the highlighted state to the normal state, from green to white, the time taken between that transition is your fade duration. Now, the navigation panel will give you five options. These are useful when you are making the UI scheme in which your arrows or WSD is used to change the selection in a grid of buttons, and you can limit it to a horizontal or vertical layout system, or you can, most of the cases, you can make it automatic, so it by default chooses what movement method, what navigation method is applicable in your set of UI controls. And using the visualize tool, you can see how your navigation is going to move between a bunch of UI controls in the scene. So for example, in this, you can see that these arrows show where your control will move based on your arrow keys or WASD keyboard input. Color tint transition mode is useful when you are just figuring out your and laying out your UI elements. But for more artistic and finer control over your UI transitions and user interaction with your buttons or UI controls, you want the next transition option, which is the sprite swap. In this case, the uh, button states or any specific UI element states is represented using a sprite. So you provide that provide your own sprites, different sprites for different states of the button, and Unity will automatically change the sprite based on which state the button is in. So for this button, I have some sprites. For highlighted, let's give it this sprite, and when it is pressed, this is slightly smaller than the highlighted sprite, and this is my disabled sprite. Now when I play the game, uh, when I move the mouse over the button, which means the button goes into a highlighted state, you can see that the sprite changes to the sprite that I have provided in the highlighted sprite field. Now I press the button, it will change to that smaller sprite, and if I disable the button, the sprite changes to the disabled sprite. So this will be good for most of your production games, the final games where a simple sprite swap is the most artistic friendly and the best looking UI transition for your games. For even more fine control over your UI transitions, you can choose the last transition mode, which is animations. In this mode, every button state change, that means going from a highlighted to a press state, will correspond to playing an animation for that state. So Unity has also given you a nice button to auto generate animations. What it will do is automatically create an animator and the different animations for all the transition UI transition states for your buttons or any UI element for that matter. So you let's create some animations inside the animations folder, and it will create a animator, and inside that animator you will have all the animations like normal, highlighted, pressed, and disabled. So for example, I want my button to grow slightly bigger when I move my mouse over that button to show that this button is selected, this button is going to be clicked. So to achieve that, I will go into the highlighted animation. I will open the animations folder, select my button, go to the highlighted, and the only thing that I want to do is to increase the size of my button. So I will add a property, go to my rect transform size delta, and whenever the button goes into the highlighted state, I want to increase the size to, for example, the default size is 160/30. Let's make it 240. Let's save that. And only one thing that you will have to remember is that make all these animations not repeatable, because you don't want the button to grow bigger, then grow smaller, then again go bigger and loop again and again. You want it to be to happen just once. So now when I play the game, and if we move our take our mouse over the button, it will start playing the highlighted animation, uh, which makes the button grow bigger. Now the speed, as you can see, the speed is quite slow. So we'll just go to the animator, increase the speed from here, and now when we come in the game, you can see the highlighted animation being played when the button goes into the highlighted state, when I move my mouse over the button. So in the same way, you can change or modify all the four states with to your liking, and these states will be automatically played by the Unity based on the user interaction with your button. So this was an introduction to transitions. Transitions would be used in most of the interactable UI elements that we are going to cover in the next videos. For example, we saw buttons, then we will see toggles and sliders, etc. So in all of those interactable UI elements, we will encounter transitions again and again. So I thought it would be better to give you an introduction of transitions before taking you to show you how you use buttons or other interactable UI elements. In the next video, we will see how we can actually make use of these buttons by taking the user button click input and using it to do something useful in our code.